Welcome, fans, to Enter the Hexadome, the fourth best podcast about Aristeia.
Jason. Say hi, Jace.
G'day.
Okay, and for this episode, we are, as we promised, going to do our thoughts on the top 5 Aristos. So if you listen to the previous episode where we discussed the AGL Season 4, we said we'd be back quickly, and we are. We've kept to that promise, although it is still 6 months since we did our episode on what we thought were the bottom 5 Aristos. But we think there's been some interesting changes that have shifted this list.
Okay, whoa. Jonah, hold on.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to stop you for a second. Are you sure that there's not another important burning topic that we need to do first?
I don't think so. Although now you're making me question if there is.
I mean, there's been a lot of developments in the game. Are you sure that we shouldn't do an episode on, that new expansion that brings the game out for 3 and 4 players?
We should.
A primetime conversation. That does seem pretty important.
We should do a primetime episode. Yes, that is a good suggestion. But let's do top 5. Let's get it done.
Oh, all right.
And we'll come back in the new year with primetime. Not in 6 months, hopefully.
Indeed.
Yeah. Okay. So this might be controversial. I think.
I think it will be controversial, especially as you said, considering how much things have changed.
So in a moment, I'll list the 5 that Jason and I have decided on that we think are in the top 5. Just to say, these are just our thoughts. We have been playing the game a lot, so hopefully, when we give our reasons, you'll recognise these. But you may have different thoughts. You may think others should have made it, in which case, please do join me on the discussion on the Discord and let us know what you think. We always welcome other opinions.
And as everyone who's been playing me on TTS knows, I do suck at this game. So, caveat.
I'm not sure that's true. Okay, so I'm going to give our top 5 and how we're going to go through them. And then towards the end of the episode, we will have some discussion on the ones or a brief overview of those who just missed out. So the top 5 that we decided on in alphabetical order are Hexa, Laxmi, Laegong, Oberon, and Wild Bill. And so the format of the episode today is we're going to go through each of those and we're going to outline why we think they are good Aristos, so good to be in the top 5. Suggest some counterplay for when you come across them, and you will come across these Aristos a lot. And finally, we're going to propose any changes that we think might need to be made to them in order to perhaps bring them down a notch, bring them a bit more on the playing field with some of the others. Although I think we're in agreement that not all of them actually need changes, despite them being strong. So
yes.
Do you want to kick us off with Hexa then, Jace?
Yeah, I think Hexa is going to be no surprise to people who are out there playing the game. Hexa has been a strong Aristo from day one. Her set of abilities, her suite of abilities, it has always been extremely strong. In the end, as we often say, in this game of ours is a game of positioning. And everything ultimately is about whether or not you can put the right Aristos in the right place at the right time. And Hexa both helps you to put your Aristos into the right place and helps you to prevent your opponents from being in the right place. And any flexible ability to do those things is always going to be very strong. She also offers some, and this is a little niche, but something which has become more relevant recently. She offers some counterplay to minions with her ability to move those around. And she also presents one of the strongest counters to some of the best offensive Aristos, certainly the close combat ones, like your Moonchilds and your Musashis, through her access to immobilization. Long story short, Hexa is bringing to the Hexadome a set of abilities which is relevant no matter what scenario you're playing. She does what she does extremely well and very efficiently. And she also has a set of tactics which reinforces that strength.
Yeah, something you've just touched on that perhaps people might not be aware of is Hexa being able to displace minions. You can also displace the 5 obstacles that are in the Hexadome. They can
Indeed.
be targeted with actions and with attacks. So that's very useful for another Aristo that we're going to talk about, Wild Bill. If you find him in a position where he can't shoot a person, then shoot an obstacle to try and hit your switch. Moonchild can deal herself a wound by attacking an obstacle. So they are relevant for attacks and actions. And as Jason says, Hexa epitomizes that in trying to move things around through Vade Retro. The immobilize action that you mentioned, Gotya, it is really good. Because it's only 2 yellow, it is a fair bit less reliable than Vade Retro. I always find myself using cards on that if I think it's a really important immobilize to try and get off.
Yeah, the switch on it is also quite effective. The -2 movement state, I feel, is often underestimated, and it is an unusual role with 2 yellows to produce no shields, to have neither a success nor a shield and a special to be able to fire the switch. So even when Gotcha doesn't quite fire, I find that it is able to impose the switch and slow Aristos down quite effectively,
Yeah,
which in a lot of cases is just as good.
Yeah, I've definitely hit the switch more than I've hit immobilized if I don't add cards into it. With regards to her cards, she's really for me a 2-card Aristo. I feel like Access Denied, which is her card that gives -2 to all enemies within 1 to 3, very rarely gets taken because it has to be played at the beginning of her activation. And very often you don't want to go in early in a round. And Ragdoll can be useful if your opponent has taken a lot of ranged Aristos, and it allows you to dazzle them as well as displace. But really, it's her other 2 cards where her power is, I think, untouchable for keeping her alive, and then unlimited power. So Jason already mentioned that her cards reinforce her role as a displacer. Unlimited power is one of the top cards in the game. And
Absolutely.
if you're playing a Ziggurat scenario, I would say it's probably the best card in the game.
Yeah, it's simply being able to displace all enemies and not even targeting them. So it bypasses the tactics that Aristos like Garter and Dart have that prevent opponents from targeting them. It bypasses those abilities completely, and allows her to displace all enemies regardless. Imposing the -2 energy state seems like a significant penalty, but to be blunt, this is something which A, is so powerful that that's a penalty well worth taking. But B, it's often being played either when Hexa is on her way back onto the table, because gosh darn, is she going to get shot a lot, and stabbed and blown up and set on fire, and all of the other hilarious ways that Aristos get taken out in this delightful game. Or it's going to be played right at the end of the game for a last moment win to pull something out of the ether at a moment when her taking a -2 energy just doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah, I think there's important rules interaction to highlight as well, which is that unlimited power is played during Hexa's activation, but you generate your energy for the round before you play the card. So if it's the start of the round, you're not coming back from the bench. You generate your 5 energy. If you play unlimited power, you've still got 5 energy for that turn. The -2 energy will go on you, but then it will flip to -1 anyway at the end of your round. So really, it's only a -1 energy debuff.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the state token is still on you, so it can still be interacted with. Someone like Eclipse can target it to flip it back over, but at the same time, it's so strong. It's just amazing.
Yeah.
I would argue that while unlimited power is an auto take, like there is absolutely no argument for running Hexa and not picking unlimited power. I think there is a case. I see Untouchable. I understand it. Obviously, one of the best counterplays to Hexa is simply to keep her in the infirmary, and so keeping her alive with Untouchable is useful. But while it's often played down exactly as you just did, by pointing out the limitations on its timing, I think access denied is often overlooked as another game changing tactic. If your opponent doesn't have good state clearance, if you've won a round and then your opponent has come close to the scoring zone, access denied can mean that every one of their team is then unable to make the next scoring zone, and guarantee you 1-2 back-to-back full scores, and often a one game. And I think that in those circumstances, it can be well worthwhile. And I think that when it is played well, there's a strong argument for including it instead of Untouchable.
Yeah, I think my experience with Hexa is that your opponent will usually have at least one high initiative damage dealer. And if you've won the first round, it only needs to be initiative 5 damage dealer because they're going to be the underdog, and they just delete her before she gets to play Ragdoll because she is a target, as we'll discuss in a moment. Before we move on to some counterplays for her, some of which we've touched on, I just want to say one more thing on unlimited power, which is just in terms of using it. Don't feel that you need to save it up to, be able to displace lots of people. If you can just displace one opposing Aristo, and that can give you a victory point swing, then it's worth it.
Yes.
I did it in a game yesterday playing Assault. It wasn't with unlimited power, it was with Max's Scram card. And I played it, and it only displaced one Aristo, but it changed Assault from a 1-1 score to a 3-0 score to me. So,
yeah.
You've got to keep an eye on the victory points. It's about what unlimited power does to score you victory points, not the maximum amount of Aristos that you can possibly displace with it. So do keep that in mind.
Yeah, it can regularly produce 3 or more point swings, and that's what I look for. An Assault's a good example. If you've each got one Aristo in the zone, that's a 3 VP swing to knock their Aristo out. So yeah, no, perfect play, and it's a good point that you shouldn't necessarily be trying to move their whole team around.
Yeah, I think that's just a kind of general play point, but certainly in relation to that tactic. Okay, what do we think about countering her then? I think you've already touched on one of the main counters to her.
Yeah, I mean, she's a blue-yellow defense, and only has 3 health. She's not the most fragile Aristo in the game. That would be Dart. But she is one of the most fragile Aristos in the game. And if you are putting a moderate amount of effort into putting her down, she can be taken out, even by secondary strikers. The likes of Eclipse or Parvati can often regularly put Hexa down. And Untouchable will protect her for a round, but that's one round of the match. And there have certainly been matches where I have put Hexa into the infirmary, mostly before her activation, for an entire match.
Yeah, when I play against Hexa, she is very often my prime target, and I already mentioned you'll normally have a decent damage dealer in your team that's either going to be the same initiative, but you've got underdog, or you've got higher initiative, and you just take her out before she has the chance. If she's not on the Hexadome, this is something we mentioned last week, fragging being a form of control, then she can't do anything. And she will go down a lot. So when you're using her, you need to play around that. I
The
think.
other
Sorry, Dave.
The other major no, sorry. The other major thing to point out is that with her movement of 4 and her range of 4, especially in scenarios like Assault, where the play can move a long way between rounds, Hexa can sometimes struggle to keep up if she's not maintaining a central position. And if she is maintaining a central position, then that usually means that she's more exposed away from the rest of her team and will therefore be easier to frag. So if your opponent is keeping Hexa kind of in the center of the Hexadome and trying to ensure that she's going to be able to influence any of the scoring zones, then you're probably going to be able to take her out relatively easily. On the other hand, if they're keeping her with the rest of their team to kind of offer her a bit of protection, she's not going to be able to go from one side to the other efficiently. And while she'll help other aristos to go from one side to the other, and this is where her ability to move her own team around can become quite significant. People often overestimate the reliability of Vade Retro, though it will almost always generate switches for Hexa so that she can be moving herself around. It's only about a 75% chance of succeeding in terms of moving your target. And so you should probably expect it to fail at least once every round. And people are often surprised when it fails once a round and will curse and swear at how bad their luck is. But that's just expected outcomes.
Yeah, I've definitely had rounds where she's failed all of her Vade retros, and that'll be pertinent when we talk about Laxmi next as well. But the other way that I like to try and negate her effectiveness, if I can't kill her, is to put Dazzled on her.
Yep, she does require line of sight, so yeah, she's relatively easy to manage in that way, and that's again somewhere where her limited movement does start to hurt.
And you mentioned Vade Retro being a range of 4 and only costing 1 energy means she can often come back from the bench and still move someone. So if you keep her on the Hexadome rather than fragging her, but keep her dazzled, she has to move around adjacent to people, so she's kind of way less effective. She doesn't have as many opportunities to hit her switch. And the final thing that I think really hurts her, you just mentioned you've got about a 75% chance of getting a Vade Retro, getting a success on 3 yellow dice. Well, if you stun her, that goes down.
Massively, yes. Hexa is a classic example of a support aristo who hated stunned before and hates it even more now.
Yeah, stun is a good counterplay to her. Do you think we've missed anything else? So stun, dazzled, and fragging.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. It's interesting to note that in terms of her overall attributes, she's quite strong. She's actually relatively good at holding other aristos in place, especially because when she's rolling her brawn, she's got a reasonable chance of getting a displacement, which can allow her to then move into a position where the enemy will be forced to disengage again a second time, depending on terrain, right? And her evade also has a very good chance of generating a displace effect so that she can get away relatively easily.
Yeah, it is worth noting though on disengage rolls, if you don't have more successes than they do blocks and you get your switch, you will get to switch away, but you will then lose all your movement points.
True, but at least you're not still standing beside Max.
Yes, yeah. But that switch might be all you need. Okay, so our third point for each aristo then is, do we think they need any changes? And if so, what? I don't think Hexa does need changes. I think she's very strong, but she has enough counterplay that she isn't really that much of a problem. What about yourself?
I would agree wholeheartedly. I think it's more the inherent nature of the game. I think if Hexa is always weaker if at least some of the scenarios which are being used in an event are more frag heavy. And so including some frag heavy scenarios helps to control Hexa's ability to be a super dominant Aristo. Um, if anything, I would argue that a couple of her tactics could perhaps be upgraded. And this is simply about improving the internal competition between your choices. I think Access Denied and Ragdoll could both do with some kind of upgrade so that they are a little bit more appealing in comparison to Unlimited Power and Untouchable, despite the fact that I've just argued that Access Denied is an extremely valid card in and of itself. But I do understand the point that you were making.
Yeah, I think Access Denied would be nice if you could play it at any point, so you could just drop from the bench, because she very often comes from the bench and just go surprise, -2 move.
I mean, so these tactics, like unlimited power during Hex's activation, like I would love to see the wording on that changed to during the actions phase of Hex's activation, just to kind of bring that in line with similar tactics from releases outside the core box. And ditto with Access Denied. You're absolutely right. If Access Denied and Ragdoll both had during the action phase of Hex's activation rather than at the beginning, it'd make an enormous difference to your ability to drop them right there.
Yeah, I don't think anyone is ever not going to take unlimited power, although I think if you are playing against Hexa, you've got to assume that your opponent has that card and keep that in your head. So always try and stand in the very center of scoring zones if you're playing standard side scenarios. And perhaps try and play to that. You may even need to save your no for it, because it's coming at some point.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay then, so that's Hexadome. Let's go on to our next Aristo, another support Aristo, which is Laxmi. And I think we're both in agreement that prior to AGL Season 4, Laxmi was very strong, but probably outside of this group of top 5 Aristos. But the AGL catapulted her into the top 5. Is that a fair summation?
Absolutely. And saw a lot of play, especially in the top tier of play.
1 AP state removal action, but she also has her passive ability of Fairy Dust, so that if any of your Aristos have a focus token on them, they can get rid of that in order to remove a state from themselves. And for people like Lei Gong, who we're going to discuss next, that is a fantastic ability to negate some of the counterplay into him.
Yes, absolutely. Lakshmi's stun has it's just incredible now. It's hard to overstate what a difference it makes to an Aristo with a 1 energy stunned with no line of sight requirement out to 5. It's so easy for her to get out. She's got the switch to put it out as well, so its reliability is even higher. It's just great, and Fairy Dust working even when she is in the infirmary or on the bench. And the fact that once you have focused out on your Aristos, it doesn't go away and can still be used to fire Fairy Dust, even if it's degraded. Like, even if it's been sitting on someone during their activation and they haven't used it, it degrades, and then they can still use it to ditch another state token off of themselves. Even if Lakshmi's been taken out, it's very, very powerful. That combination is just brilliant. And it pulls her clearly up into the top 5.
Yeah, we discussed the changes to Stend last week. I hope we've got them across. I hope people appreciate just how good we think Stend is now. I think when you look at it, it's like, okay, it's still strong, but when you play it, oh my word, does it just have an effect? Just every roll, you're like, oh, I can't do that. Oh, I can't do that. It is debilitating and very frustrating. I think Laxmi as well. I don't think we need to talk about her kind of skills and so forth anymore. She's mostly just putting out focus and stunned, but she also has Atom, which is like Hex's Unlimited Power, one of the top cards in the game.
It's basically the great thing about Atom is that it has no timing requirement. You can use it offensively, you can use it defensively, you can use it on any of your Aristos activations. It's that ability, that flexibility that really makes it so solid. And it pretty much guarantees that you are going to win one roll, barring the most comical of bad luck.
Yeah, so for those who aren't aware, Atom you play before a roll is made, and you choose an orange, blue, or yellow dice from your opponent's pool, and that is the only dice they get to roll. Now, the important thing is you play this before they make a roll, like I just said. So if your opponent is gearing up for a really crucial attack and throws in some cards themselves, they add maybe a focus or a take aim to give themselves extra dice. And then you get to play this after that, after all the cards have been played, before the roll gets made. So not only can you reduce the roll to that single dice, you can also force your opponent to waste cards as well. It's a really fantastic card.
One of my favorite plays with this is to wait for an opponent to make an attack and stack tactics onto it, and play oranges to enhance my own defense. But of course, oranges are likely to deal damage back, and then reduce my opponent's pool down to a single yellow on their own attack and kill their Aristo off of their own strike. It's a beautiful play.
Yeah, I think other cards are all strong and will all be dependent on your situation. Generally, I take Full Kaleidoscope, which is the one that just hands out stun to the whole enemy team as long as they're within range 7. It's very easy to set that up to catch everybody.
Yeah, there was a time when I would have argued that Team Reset had a place, but I think generally speaking, Lakshmi's ability to keep focus out on her own on her own team, and also to clear any loose additional states with Purge 92 directly, just means that Team Reset is seldom necessary. And yeah, the ability to stun basically all of the opponent's team, like it's very rare that you're not going to be able to get Lakshmi into a position where she's within range 7 of literally all of your opponent's Aristos on the table.
Yeah, if I'm playing against a team that has quite a lot of states, I will often take Team Reset. Just like with Unlimited Power, don't be afraid to use it if it's only going to take a single state off one of your Aristos, but then that will allow them to, if they were immobilized, for example, to move into a scoring zone. But do know that it does remove all states. So if you've spent time putting focus out on all of your friends and all of a sudden you feel like you need to play Team Reset, you lose all states, both the good ones and the bad ones.
It's well worth keeping in mind.
Yeah. Okay, so counterplay to her then. I think there's only one counterplay really, and that is to frag her, get her off the Hexadome.
Well, that's true, but I think part of what guarantees her place in the top 5 is that as long as she has had an opportunity to activate and get focused out, and to be blunt, you should always be making sure that Lakshmi is well hidden behind your Aristos to prevent your opponent from fragging her before she can activate in the first round. With that caveat, as long as she's had the chance to put focus states out, Fairy Dust still functions. And so she's still able to provide support even from the bench or the infirmary. And so even fragging her isn't necessarily a perfect counterplay.
It stops her from putting stunned out onto your models, though. It does reduce her energy pool when she comes back. So I think it is worthwhile. Unlike Hexa, so Lakshmi has those 3 yellow dice on debuffer, which, as Jason has said, you've got about a 75% chance of that going off. So, but unlike Hexa, she doesn't really care about stunned as much, because if she's already got focus on her, she'll just use Fairy Dust to get rid of it, or she can try and purge herself. Purging is an orange and a yellow. It is a bit more difficult with stunned on. So she is a little bit affected by stun, but not to the same degree that Hexa is.
Absolutely. There's an argument if you can get both stunned and silenced out onto her. So if you silence Fairy Dust and stun her, Purge 92 has a reduced chance of going off. If she can't use her own Fairy Dust to simply ditch the stunned, then that limits her somewhat. As you said, Purge 92 isn't that reliable if stunned is on Lakshmi, but at the same time, it's the fact that she's so difficult to effectively counterplay, which I feel really guarantees her place in the top 5. Of course, she does have relatively limited movement, and while she picks up extra movement points from switches, that's only really having an effect in her own turn. So, sometimes she can present a vulnerability in terms of simply having a body less for the purposes of scoring, either by being prevented from getting to the scoring zone or by being taken off the table. So there's some validity there.
Yeah, I find that she can normally pretty reliably get enough extra movement for it to move from one zone to another. If you're on the standard mat, obviously on ziggurats you can often have quite a bit further to get, so that's not quite as easy. But yeah, I think taking her out. You mentioned, how you deploy her and protect her. I think before taking Lakshmi, although she's very strong, you need to think about the scenario. If it's one that rewards frags through victory points, there are several of those. The new Hunter and Prey, for example, she folds very, very easily. She is very squishy. If someone looks at her, she will fall over. She's only a yellow, black on defense. She's only got 2 wounds. So you may want to take that into consideration, particularly on scenarios where you're able to deploy nearer to one another as well. So I like to deploy someone like Wild Bill in a zone near her so that I can shoot her first turn, because Bill's higher initiative and will go before her, and I want to get her off the board quickly. So you do need to take those things into consideration. But nevertheless, still a super strong Aristo. And you've hinted at this already, Jace, but there's a change you think needs making just to tone it down a little bit?
Absolutely. Either Lakshmi needs a similar ability to new Hippolyta. So when Hippolyta goes down, all of her enhancement tokens to initiative get pulled off. And I think one possible change is you could add that sort of function to Lakshmi so that if she goes down, her focus states come off, which would then stop Fairy Dust from firing while she's in the infirmary, at least as long as there wasn't another source of focus in the team. And if you're going to double up on that, great, that should be rewarded, right? But the other thing you could do would simply to state in Fairy Dust that it doesn't function when she's on the bench or in the infirmary. And that might be the easiest way to do it.
Yeah, I think I favour that approach, because I don't think there's anyone else who gives focus out, is there? Am I forgetting it?
Fiddler does, but only on his own jackbots, I guess. Her own jackbots, I guess.
Yeah, I think I favour your approach that she should need to be in the Hexadome directing it in order, if you look at all the art, she's got the kind of hologram computer screens up. I imagine her with Fairy Dust kind of using that in order to remove these kind of negative states from her allies. So I think it would make sense that she needs to be on the Hexadome in order to do it. I think that's quite an elegant change.
I think it's the only static enhancement effect which can't be shut down in the entire game. I don't think there's a similar ability which can be fired from the infirmary.
I think Oberon's what the...
Oh, actually, no, good call. Oberon. I guess Oberon's card enhancement would be the same.
Yeah.
But still.
Yeah, it is very strong. And there's an argument that Oberon's could be worded the same, even though, as we touched on last week, it doesn't get used that much.
No, nowhere near as much. Anyway.
Shall we move on to our first fragging Aristo, or predominantly fragging Aristo, and that is Lagon.
Yeah, and I think pointing out that he's only predominantly a fragging Aristo is a key part of understanding why he still has a place. Not only does he have the ability to pretty much delete one target per turn at will, but he's also a really, really strong scorer, which I think people often underestimate. His mobility is very good. His ability to teleport away from any attempt to pin him down, and to move twice in a turn using that teleportation, even if an opponent has immobilized him. Plus his movement of 5 means that he's one of the strongest scorers in the game.
Yeah, people sleep on that movement 5 as well. I think they don't expect it. I mean, if as long as he's not pinned down, because if he's pinned down, his agility's rubbish, so he will have to use his teleport. But even if he uses his teleport, he's still range 8. That is plenty, and because the teleport allows him to kind of move over people in a way that lots of Aristos wouldn't be able to. They'd have to go round. He is a very reliable scorer. And I think off mic, you and I were having a discussion about who should make it into the top 5. And we had a bit of debate about Lagon and whether he should be in or not in favour of some of the others that we'll mention towards the end. But I think we decided that he should be in because of this manoeuvrability.
Absolutely. I think that's the key thing which really pulls him in. But he's also very tough. The fact that he can place his own smoke and be in that smoke reliably every turn, with no dice roll required, with no other requirements. He doesn't need anybody to support him. He doesn't need to work with any other Aristos to be able to set that up. He just does it all on his own, flawlessly. I think that means that he's also very difficult to take down. He seems vulnerable because of his limited defense. And sure, that is a factor as long as you can get to him and target him. But if he's standing in smoke, ranged Aristos can't attack him, pretty much full stop. And the fact that he can teleport away means that even melee Aristos are going to get one opportunity to put him down. They're usually only going to get the one swing. And if they don't finish him, which at 4 health isn't guaranteed, he's just not going to be there. And they're going to die because he's going to kill them on his next activation.
Yeah, I was going to make the point about melee Aristos. He doesn't get double attacked very often. He usually only gets attacked once. And even with, some of the really good Aristos in the game, let's say Valk running up and hitting him at a red and 3 orange, getting 4 successes after his defense roll isn't that reliable. He can take some hits.
To be fair, Valkyrie's probably one of the best answers to him that exists in the game right now, because she probably does have a reasonable chance of straight up deleting him between the stack of abilities she has on her attack. But that's assuming that you don't have, the best defensive card in the entire game in your hand. Because on top of everything else, he's also got Faded in Smoke to be literally immune to all damage for a round.
Yeah, Faded in Smoke is a fantastic card and doesn't have to be on him. He combos incredibly well with Cosmo, and I've had a game where Moonchild was stood in smoke and I played Faded in Smoke, and then that lets you attack. And the same is true of Lagon. If you play Faded in Smoke early, then obviously, he's in smoke actually. That doesn't matter because he's attacking from outside range 1 anyway. But you can just give away all your shields if it's on someone like Moonchild. But should we talk about his killing potential? Because I think most people's issue with Lagon is just how good he is at deleting people.
Yeah, okay. Well, so for a start off, he doesn't have to roll dice to be able to place his own smoke. He gets to jump into that smoke automatically, which means he will always, unless you've forced him to move further than 3 before making his attack. So he has functionally a range of 7 from his starting position to his target. If you can force him to go further than that, sometimes he won't get an automatic free orange for a total of 3 oranges and an automatic critical hit. mean, he's functionally the same as a fully charged Valkyrie, but with better range, and the red is automatically guaranteed to be the best result. It's nuts.
Yeah. We should probably just kind of mention how Lei Gong works in case people aren't familiar. So he's one of two Aristos currently that have these two different states. So he comes on his red side, so his initial profile, and at the beginning of his activation, he always flips to that side. But then as a 0-point action, he can flip himself onto his blue side, which is his much more aggressive damaging side. Typically, your turn with Lei Gong will be that you will Mirrors of Lei Gong, which puts the smoke within 0 to 3. You will move yourself into that smoke. You will flip onto your blue side, and then you will declare the attack that Jason just mentioned, which is Closed Barrage. If you're within smoke, you get an extra orange to your attacks, so it does become 3 orange and a crit success.
And he ignores the effects of smoke, so he can shoot through his own smoke and also ignore any that anyone else has placed.
Yeah, and he has I think he's taken a slight nerf with the changes to crit successes in AGL Season 4, so that crit success is now just 1 success. It's not 2 like it used to be, which is a good thing. But I think the reason he's so effective is that his switch allows him to use one of his shields to cancel one of his opponent's shields. But he will be attacking from within smoke, which means you can't draw line of sight to him, which means your successes can't do damage to him anyway. There are some corner cases where they would, if he was marked, if he was attacking someone like Bixie or Cosmo or another Lei Gong, who all ignore smoke themselves. But generally, he's allowed to just switch away his shields with impunity, which I think is the thing that really pushes him up.
So one conversation that has happened is there has been a counter argument. Well, Lei Gong's not that good. I mean, after all, this same mechanic already existed in the game. I mean, Dart has been in the game for a long time now. She was in a relatively early expansion, and she, because she has hidden, has had that same ability to launch attacks without taking any damage herself for years now. And she has a switch which allows her to swap shields to negate, to switch out her own shields to negate an opponent's shields. But the thing is, that combination of abilities is something that has been acknowledged on Dart. And during the design process, she was deliberately tuned down in terms of her damage output. She was deliberately modified to make her less damaging than any other striker because of that combination of abilities. And what's obscene about Lei Gong is that he has the dice output of the best melee striker in the game in terms of pure damage potential, Valkyrie. And he has it at range, and he has it with guaranteed mobility, and he has it with perfect defense. It's just a mind-boggling combination of capabilities, and I still genuinely don't understand how the team that playtested him allowed him to be put into the game in this state. It's just he remains the one Aristo that I will look anyone in the eye and say he is broken and should be banned. That is the only appropriate response to him at this time in the game.
Yeah, he's. I think the one thing that sort of keeps him in check a little more than Aristos like Musashi and Bill, although as we acknowledged on the previous episode, they have been brought down with the new AGL rules anyway, is that he's only deleting, I say only, I'm doing inverted commas here, obviously you can't see that. He can only delete one Aristo a turn. He doesn't have the ability to take out multiple ones. But he is just so reliable at taking out that one Aristo that he picks on. He's like, I'm going to look at you and you are going to die, and that is that. And that generally works.
Yeah, I agree. That is the key limitation that he has, that inability to multi-attack. But at the same time, that is at least not a particularly strong mitigating factor.
Yeah, and he is, as we stated when we started talking about him. He's a very good scorer as well. He's got good maneuverability because of his ability to do Mirrors of Lei Gong. He's got movement 5, which is very quick. There's not that many movement 5 Aristos in the game, and he's got a good suite of cards as well. We already mentioned Faded in Smoke, Heaven's Wrath is a really good card that just automatically does a wound. And I think we've discussed this previously, that the ability to just do a wound, even though it's only one, but without rolling any dice, is really, really strong. And also, if that isn't the final wound to take someone out, you're giving them -2 initiative or -2 movement. And you already made the point when we were discussing Hexa that -2 movement is a really powerful state that's very often overlooked. And to add to his scoring potential, he's got I Am Smoke. Now, this does need a little bit of setup, but I've had it done against me where somebody set it up with Cosmo and scored Capture the Flag first turn with Lei Gong. So I Am Smoke allows him to place on a smoke token that isn't in a scoring zone, and you're not allowed to perform attacks. So you just have a smoke token just outside a scoring zone. He can move from one end of the Hexadome to the other and then just walk into the scoring zone. And I'd never seen it before. I'd never considered it. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. I'm 3 points down already in the first turn to Capture the Flag. But all I could do was just marvel at how excellent the play was.
Yeah, that's outstanding. The other thing to keep in mind, we haven't even mentioned his generic switch. He can spend a success and a special to place himself on a free space with smoke within range 1 to 6. So on top of everything else, if you've got another Aristo to deploy smoke, he can also teleport himself with either of his attacks. So if you have somebody assisting him by setting up smoke, and Cosmo was the obvious choice here, he can be killing and scoring in the same round very, very easily.
It does combo with Faded in Smoke as well. If Lei Gong is the person in the smoke, not only can he negate all wounds, but he also gets to place a smoke token out within range 6 for every damage that he negated. So he can place a smoke within 6. He still rolls his defense dice, and if he's on his red side in particular, with a blue and a black, it's not that difficult to hit that switch, and you can hit it. No, you can't hit on the green dice. Actually, you do need to be on that side.
Yeah, you have to be, or adding dice, obviously.
Yes, yeah. So that's very corner case. It's unlikely to happen that time, but do be aware of it. 6 is a huge amount to go, and it could potentially allow him to displace into a scoring zone.
I have seen that exact combo come off. Faded in Smoke, Lei Gong dropping a smoke token in space 6 hexes away, and then teleporting into that space. No, it's bad. It's bad. Don't let people do it. Lei Gong is good enough without helping him along.
Okay, so what's our counterplay to Lei Gong? I think I'll shoot with one first. My favourite counterplay is to take Gata and just dazzle him.
Yep, dazzled. Gata and Oberon are both very good at dazzling him. Don't rely on anyone that requires line of sight. Obviously, it's important to point out he is always going to be in smoke.
Well, this is why I like Gata, is because she's initiative 7, so she's going to go before him usually.
Yeah.
And Dazzle is particularly effective on Lei Gong because his attacks on both sides of his cards have a minimum range of 3 on the red side and 2 on the blue side. So if he's dazzled, all he can do is get a contender out if he wants to attack. So dazzling him is strong. Do you want to discuss Oberon a bit more as well? And his
yeah, I mean, Oberon is strong here because he's also capable of dazzling, and he's capable of dazzling with no line of sight. But he's also strong because he can silence Lord of Thunder and prevent Lei Gong from flipping. There is, unlike Moonchild, who has a specific piece of text preventing you from silencing her ability to transform, Lagong doesn't. So you can shut Lord of Thunder down and stop him from flipping at all. Alternatively, you can shut down either Mirrors of Lagong, meaning that he can't teleport and play smoke anymore, or you can. If he is flipped, you can shut down Chi Vision. But because of the way he works, Spiritual Vision and Chi Vision are different abilities. So if he flips while he is silenced, actually, how does that interaction work? You get to choose another target when he flips, don't you?
I don't think so. I think it just silences the one you said it silenced. Yeah, so you want to be silencing him when he's on his red side, really. But Oberon is good at that because he's higher initiative. So
yeah.
you try.
Either way, shutting down his ability to teleport and play smoke, or shutting down his ability to flip, either of them makes him far less dangerous.
Yeah, stunned isn't particularly effective against him just because of his brute strength of having so many dice on his switch. He doesn't care about immobilized because his Mirrors of Lagong allows him to place. As with all of these, fragging him is an option, although we've already discussed that can be quite difficult.
If you've got melee Aristos with decent movement and decent initiative, like Musashi is going to be able to fairly reliably put down a Lagong, but he's going to spend his entire game chasing him down. If you have to kill Lagong every round, and that's all Musashi can do for an entire game, then he's almost worth including at that point, right?
Yeah. Lagong can be a big distraction, and even if you're just distracting for your opponent from scoring, you're still winning the game or winning the scenario, which is important. I think Dazzle is certainly the most effective counter against him, and it's why I always like to pair Lagong with Lakshmi, who we've already discussed. You put focus on him. And then, because of Fairy Dust, he can just remove those most debilitating states that can go on him.
Yeah, absolutely.
What would we change to him then? What do we think? Because I think we're definitely both in agreement. He needs toning down, and I think we've got a couple of thoughts on how that should be done.
Well, I mean, there's one easy and obvious one. I would actually delete Chi Vision from his blue side and just leave Spiritual Vision on both sides of the card. So, in other words, remove his ability to add an extra orange when he's in smoke, which would tone down his attack to being in line with the other ranged Aristos.
Yeah, I think 2 orange and a crit success is still very strong.
Yes, it would still make him one of the best ranged strikers, and it would mean that he wasn't the best striker in the game, full stop, as well as being ranged. And the other thing is, I would significantly rewrite Mirrors of Lagong, and what I would be doing with it is I would rewrite it to function in a similar way to Tao Wu's ability, Hallucinations. So force him to roll dice to place smoke and make his teleportation a switch. So he can't place his own smoke and teleport into that smoke in a single activation.
I think I would agree on making it a roll, but I'm not sure it would need a switch as well. I think maybe just make Mirrors of Lagong a orange and a yellow, which is fairly reliable, is probably a kind of 80% chance of going off, but isn't automatically guaranteed. I think if you made it, it needed a success to place and a switch to get yourself into it, it might be just taking it down a little bit too much, perhaps.
Now, the reason why I think that it should be a switch is that it would actually make Lagong an Aristo that played best with support from other Aristos. It would mean that you wanted to take him with Cosmo so that Cosmo could put down smoke for Lagong to teleport into. Whereas at the moment, he doesn't need anyone to be the strongest striker in the game.
I do like characters to synergize. And I've made the point before on this podcast that Lei Gong loves Cosmo, and he doesn't care whether Cosmo is on your team or the opposing player's team. He just loves Cosmo being on the board. But I'm not in favour of a situation where you're almost forced to take Aristos together. I like, and I think that Chemical Brothers is a good example of this. They do operate very well together, but they also operate very well independently, and I like that. Which is why I think I wouldn't favour him having the switch. But I do favour a roll, so it's just not quite as reliable. It doesn't just go off, and then if it doesn't go off, you need to kind of think about your turn a bit more. I think the other switch that I would consider making is just getting rid of his switch on Closed Barrage, the swapping a shield to nullify your target shield.
Or maybe make it 2. If it was a 2-for-1 exchange, that would probably be less egregious.
Yeah.
The other thing that I think needs to change is Faded in Smoke. It is just too powerful. And I think that what should be happening to it is that it shouldn't be until the end of the round. I think it should be until the end of the activation.
Interesting. Yeah, I could see that. I think it's worth pointing out as well that we're not suggesting that all of these changes should be made. I think if you made all of these changes, you'd move him from the top 5 to the bottom 5, probably.
I disagree. I think all of these changes should be made. I think he is unplayably broken and should be banned in his current state. And I think he needs at least 3 or 4 changes before he is on par with the other Aristos in our top 5.
Oh, so you think change Mirrors of Lei Gong to be a role that needs a switch for him to place, get rid of Chi Vision, change his switch to 2 shields for 1, and change Faded in Smoke.
And you would still be an Aristo that would be picked.
Okay, I disagree there. I think that would probably bring him down too much. I think all of that. I think I would make Mirrors of Lei Gong a role. So that you have to roll to do it, but you get to do the whole action if you do it. I wouldn't make the place a switch, and then I would change either Close Barrage to the 2 shields for 1, or get rid of the switch completely, or change Chi Vision. I think that would probably be enough. Just to it would bring his lethality down. Have I just made up a word? Lethality, is that a word?
No, that's a legit word.
Yeah, it would bring his lethality down, and also lean more into his mobility and get people to sort of use that a bit more. Because I think primarily people are taking him just to frag people, because that's what he does.
And he is so good as a scorer, and I think that that's very overlooked at the moment. There's that whole other side to him that I feel isn't being played into right now, because he is so good at simply deleting an Aristo a turn. It's important to keep in mind that while I think a number of changes need to be made to tone down his damage output, he would still be one of the best scorers in the game.
Yeah. I
think he's better than any other scorer other than Gata.
Yeah, I do like his scoring potential. I think if you do all of those changes, he just gets subbed out for other people. Which might not be a bad thing, but I think you need to be quite cautious in a game like this that has so many moving parts that.
It's okay. Well, for a start off, I doubt we're going to be seeing nerfs anytime soon.
No.
And I know that V's approach is far more cautious than this.
I think I'm probably more cautious than you when it comes to Lei Gong. But let's move on. We've got 2 more to discuss, so let's discuss Oberon. Now, like Laxmi, he is one that has been catapulted with season 4. I made the point last week that had we done our top 5 Aristos on time, Oberon wouldn't have been in my top 5. But because we're doing this after the release of AGL season 4, he is absolutely catapulted into my top 5. He's so good.
Yeah, he was one of the Aristos that we talked about, maybe including in the bottom 5.
Did we? I've played a lot of Oberon since then.
Yeah, wasn't one that we settled on, but he was definitely a name that got mentioned when we were having the initial discussion about who we were going to put into the bottom five. And you're right, like it's fair to say that we quickly decided that he wasn't one of them. But his name was definitely considered, which I think goes to show just how far he's come in terms of his overall significance.
I think probably also demonstrates how much I've learned him since then, because I think he'd have been in my top 10 prior to AGL4 just launching, because I have started using him a lot. I think in particular, I played in one of the previous leagues against Krotos, who's a very good Russian player, and he's an Oberon, and he just showed me what Oberon could do, and I was like, oh, okay, now I get it. And I started including him myself, and I, prior to AGL Season 4 launching, I thought he was a very good Aristo, probably not quite threatening the top 5, but in the top 10. But now he is just so good. I mean, we're doing this in alphabetical order, but he could maybe be 1. He's so strong now. He's so good.
Well, why don't you run us through those key things that are making him, if not number 1, then certainly challenging for it in this season?
Okay, so firstly, silence was already a very strong state. We have discussed it in as a counterplay to some of the very strong Aristos already, and on his action, you'll forget when waking, he has a switch that allows him to put out stunned or dazzled, and obviously stunned has become much better in Season 4. But I think the key thing that's really made him very good is you'll remember when dreaming. So this is a 3 action point action, an orange and a yellow dice, and on a success, you get to search your tactics deck and pick a card, and then you shuffle it. But it also has a switch on a shield and an exclamation, which is fairly easy to hit. On an orange and yellow dice, you get to draw a card. Now, an important thing.
Actually, that's his generic. That's his generic switch, so he can hit that anytime.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't clear. That switch isn't on You'll Remember When Dreaming. It is a generic switch, yes. So he can do it on You'll Forget When Waking as well, although when he's doing that, he tends to want to use the symbols for his other switches that are specific to that action.
True.
Just a quick note on timing is that switches happen before you work out your successes. So if you do this action, you draw your top tactic before you search your deck to choose a tactic to pick out if you get a switch and a success. But card draw is just so good now. We mentioned last week that you're not drawing a card every time you frag someone now. So the ability to just get extra tactics cards through his switches and to choose out specific tactics that you want. One thing that I found early in AGL4, first game that I played, I used the standard deck. I didn't draw Stick to the Plan or Catch My Breath. My opponent didn't draw their No. It's more difficult to get those really key cards that you want. So the ability to just look at your deck and say, yeah, I'll have that one now, thank you, is just so good.
He obviously plays well into those Aristos who have extremely strong tactics. And I think that there are definitely some team builds that lean into tactics heavily that Oberon certainly enhances. But anything that's offering additional tactics draw in this new environment where we're not getting as many in hand thanks to frags, it's very, very solid. But there was already an argument. I think it's Lei Gong that really catapulted Oberon in the competitive stakes in my mind. Lei Gong being such an obnoxious problem to deal with, and Oberon being one of really only 2 Aristos that effectively counters him, having a no line of sight necessary dazzled. That has really pushed him up the rankings very substantially.
Yes, yeah, his counterplay is good. I mean, and stunned and dazzled are very good states to get out, not only on Lei Gong, but in general. If you can pair it, and I have done this sometimes, it does give you two very, very squishy Aristos. But Oberon loves hanging out with Laxmi because if he uses a focus on his attacks, I have had on his actions. I have had occasions where I've double switched to draw tactics, so I've drawn two and then looked through my deck for another one. It's very strong.
True. I mean, obviously, he has the ability to drop a tactic to add a yellow to a roll, and that is a useful ability. I'm Hope is certainly something which is important to keep in mind. Of course, that requires you to have good access to tactics, and a lot of the time, in this season especially, you're not necessarily going to be wanting to drop tactics to pull yellows.
Yeah, absolutely. So I spoke on the previous episode that I think TCOM is the big winner, or a big winner of CCL, season 4 of the AGL, and it combos so well with Oberon. I played them together in my league game last night, and having the ability to just get lots of cards yourself, to use TCOM to cycle through your cards when Oberon's not sort of picking out the ones you want, and forcing your opponent to drop cards. I always had the cards I wanted, and I put a lot of pressure on my opponent's hand as well. It was a really good combination that I enjoyed.
Nice. The other thing that's quite good to point out here, with movement 5, Oberon is actually relatively good as a pocket scorer as well. Often I find opponents tend to ignore him if he is hanging back and simply drawing tactics. But then being able to move 10, he can often shoot into a scoring zone unexpectedly, and that is something that has proven useful to me in matches where I have been using him.
Yeah, I put him in the middle yesterday in Assault, but he had
Brave.
I've got Maximus in my league team, so he had a Maximus, and
helps.
I think he took, in the end, across the game, 4 or 5 jackpot shots to the face and didn't go down, which is quite impressive.
That is quite impressive.
I moved him to another scoring zone as well, because, movement 5, don't sleep on him. Even though, and one of the counterplays to him is just to frag him. I know we've said this before, but he is very squishy. He's a blue and a black defense, and he only has 2 wounds. He's very easy to take out if he doesn't have a Maximus to take all his wounds from him. But even if he's getting taken out, if you're just running into scoring zones and forcing your opponent to deal with something and spend their action points on getting him off the scoring zone, that can be worthwhile.
Absolutely, he can be a surprisingly useful pocket scorer. I love these support Aristos who have high movement. It just forces opponents to keep them in consideration when it comes to their scoring potential, or gives you the opportunity to pull something unexpected when they don't.
Yeah, very often as well, you'll give up. You'll let him go down because you'll just let him take the wound, so you can draw a tactic with his switch on defense.
Yep, I've definitely done that myself.
And he's also really effective coming back from the bench as well, because he's initiative 6. He's activating before most people. He can drop down next to people and just do your forget when waking. And your first activation of a round when he's coming back from the bench, you can just drop next to several Aristos, and particularly if you use some cards on it, a take aim or a focus to get the extra switches off, you can really just come down and upset people a lot with him.
Yeah, I've definitely dropped him, dropped a focus and something else using I'm a Hope to add the 3rd yellow, and I've effectively shut down 2 of them, and people seldom see it coming. If anything, in terms of a disadvantage to Oberon, I've never been that impressed by his tactics.
Okay, I do like his tactics. I always play with the same 2. So I always play with Desire, which is a kind of similar version to Wild Bills. You get to use a tactic again, which I think is really strong. That option,
true, no arguments there.
That option to use a no and then use a no again, or in the team I'm playing for the league, 8 Ball is an Aristo who's a bit below the curve but has some fantastic cards, and being able to use those cards more than once is really strong. And I really like Despair, which is the one where you can draw 3 tactics and then choose 2 and put them on the top or bottom of the deck. You can do it to yourself or your opponent. I always tend to do it to myself to try and kind of get key cards. I agree, his tactics aren't fantastic. I have heard of Destiny being kind of situationally brilliant.
It can be decisive, but it's hard to pull off properly, especially that you then have to keep Oberon up. And as previously noted, he's not exactly tough.
Yeah. I think Destiny is a good one to play when you're coming back from the bench, where you can drop him down as far away from anyone as possible at the beginning of the round. And then you play there. So Destiny is the one that stops both players using any tactics for the remainder of the round. So if, like me, you tend to be someone who leans heavily into tactics early to try and get that advantage, if you're getting quite low on tactics, which can happen because, early on you'll almost always be doing card draw with Oberon, and then I find this role switches up towards the end of the game. I think it can be situationally useful if you think your opponent is holding on to cards for that big combo, but
it certainly makes Hexa unhappy when you drop Destiny with Oberon in a corner of the table no one can get to, and she then can't use ultimate power to win the game instantly.
Yeah, I just think it's very situational. It's not even always going to get played. You might have it in your hand and not have a situation to do it. Unlike, for example, Hexa and Laxmi, who we've already discussed, who have cards that independently are just absolutely phenomenal. I don't think that any of Oberon's cards are quite in that category, but he himself is still fantastic.
Other than Desire, which, yes, fair. Recycling tactics is amazing.
Yeah, particularly if you pair it with the last Aristo we're going to discuss in a moment, Wild Bill.
But before we move on, how would you tone Oberon down?
Well, do we think there's any other counterplay first, apart from just fragging him? He's slightly upset by stunned, I guess.
Orange and yellow isn't terrible in terms of bypassing stunned. It certainly having stunned on him will make it less likely for him to hit his switches a lot of the time.
Yeah,
and it decreases his reliability. But I'd hesitate to call it a hard counter. His range isn't that great, so immobilization can hurt him.
Yeah, if he wants to move, I feel like if all you do in a turn is you'll remember when dreaming, he doesn't mind so much.
Yeah, I found that while I understand that use of him, when I have been playing him, I've tended to use him a little more aggressively. And by that, I don't mean shoving him in people's faces, but I do mean moving him around and using You'll Forget When Waking to actively interfere with my opponent's Aristos a bit more. And so immobilization certainly hurts when you're wanting to use him that way. Though it is fair to point out that he can always just default back to, oh, well, I guess I'll draw some tactics.
Yeah, I find early game I focus on tactics. The first round or two is normally try and get the tactics, but obviously they're a finite resource. So after that, I tend to lean more into getting him into places and doing You'll Forget When Waking. And I think that's just part of the game is knowing what you're facing and when. Do you need to get an important card, or do you need to go and silence someone to stop them doing something? And that's part of the game that comes with experience.
Exactly.
But in terms of changing, I think You'll Remember When Dreaming and You'll Forget When Waking should both be 3 action points. I think being able to do both in a turn on an initiative 6 Aristo, so he's very often getting to go first, it is probably a bit too strong. I yesterday, for example, in the game, and I've had this in several games, I've got him into a position where he's able to do both in a round, and it can just be so strong.
On the other hand, I'd argue that if your opponent is allowing you to put Oberon into a position where he can use his entire activation to draw tactics and then to affect your opponent's Aristos without killing him, is a failure on their part. He is so vulnerable to being put down that if you're putting him out there like that, and admittedly, like you can double tap him, right? If you've moved him at the end of the turn and then you immediately activate him again at the beginning of the next round, with high initiative, sure, you'll occasionally be able to pull that off without him going down. But unless you are dedicating your last activation, first activation to him like that, and there are a lot of other Aristos who want to take advantage of that potential double tap opportunity, Oberon should be relatively easy to frag if you're exposing him like that. Personally, I think that the change to silence has just gone too far. I think that the way it was upgraded this season has simply made him too good. And I think that dialing back the improvement to silence so that it only hits abilities and automatic abilities rather than attacks as well is the simple change which takes Oberon from being better than he should be back to good but not amazing.
Yeah, I sort of glossed over that actually. Sorry, that silence got better this season. We discussed this on the previous episodes.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it last time.
Yeah, but just in case anyone didn't listen, if you didn't, well, you should. But yeah, silence getting better is a big change to him, and he can do that double tap quite effectively. The only Aristos with higher initiative than him are Gata and Axel. Very often, you can play around the fact that you might become underdog second in the next round. So he can do that double tap quite a lot. I think he's very effective at it.
Yeah, I mean that's fair. I understand the point that you're making, but I feel like an Aristo remaining static in place and using their full energy pool to activate two abilities, like that's actually not unreasonable. And if You'll Forget When Waking was improved to 3, it would mean that all he could ever do was move and activate one of his two abilities. And that's a rare restriction. It'd also make him far, far worse coming back from the bench. And I'm wary of putting Aristos into a position where they basically don't function at all for 2 rounds.
Well, the first round back from the bench, he could do exactly the same. He'd be fine. It wouldn't make a difference. But the second round, when he was only on 4 energy, I guess it would, because currently he could move and do You'll Forget When Waking, which he wouldn't be able to do if you made it a 3 AP action.
Or he comes back and uses either on 3 in the first round.
But yeah, that would be the change I would make. Yeah, you can frag him, but as I found out yesterday, he's really obnoxious with his friend Max.
Nice.
Keeping him away.
In terms of other changes, I think I'd be looking to upgrade his tactics personally.
Making it better? That's controversial, Jason.
Oh, well, I suggested making Hexa better by improving some of her tactics, and I know that's a controversial position, but I like the idea that an Aristo's tactics should be equally attractive. And I think that, like Hexa, there's an auto take, and then there's 3 options. And I'd rather see those 3 options improved.
I think if you either brought down silenced or change You'll Forget When Waking, to 3 AP, then I think, there's a case for improving some of his tactics. But at the moment, I just think he's so strong, he's so good, particularly in this new season. AGL is all about that.
Yeah.
If you change the card draw, then all of a sudden he does take a drop, because it's his card draw, I think, that really makes him strong.
True, and I would argue the other thing that's making him strong at the moment is the fact that he counterplays well into some of the other strong Aristos that we're talking about here. And so if there were other changes that altered that meta, and so, for example, Lei Gong was brought down a couple of notches, I think that also brings Oberon down as a natural counterplay to Lei Gong.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, shall we've just discussed card draw, and I think that gives us a nice segue into our last Aristo that we're going to discuss in our top 5, which is Wild Bill. And this was, fortunately, he comes last in our alphabetical order, but also I think in our top 5, he is number 5 for both of us. And we had quite a bit of discussion on who else we could have included, and I think ultimately we decided it was his card draw ability that probably just kept him in the top 5 at the expense of some of them.
I would agree wholeheartedly, and yeah, I think We'll talk about the Aristos that nearly made the cut, and it is definitely his ability to draw tactics, which keeps Wild Bill in the top 5 this season. Obviously, he remains a strong Aristo. His ranged ability to take down targets is second only to Lei Gong.
Bill is a very good counter to Lei Gong if you can get him early. So if you're on one of those maps where you can deploy nearer to each other, he's a very good counter to Lei Gong. If you don't get to shoot in round 1, Lei Gong's in smoke and making you sad, unless you're playing Sterling Forge and have by inches.
Yeah, I guess then you can walk up and put a gun against his temple.
Which is very satisfying.
Yeah, I must say there's definitely a place for an Aristo to come out with the offering the ability to ignore smoke as a tactic. There's definitely a play archetype there which remains unfilled.
Throw in multispectral visors around the Hexadome.
Yes, or something along those lines. Anyway, but in terms of Wild Bill, obviously he's been popular for a while now, so I think most people will be familiar with his strengths. Obviously, he's got that high initiative. He's got good range. He's throwing an excellent dice pool. He's got the ability to add extra damage by discarding tactics when you need that one more star to put someone down. He's got the opportunity to multi-attack by firing twin pistols again, and on top of everything else, he has the chance to draw tactics. He's a very solid all-round Aristo who even has good defense and reasonable health at 4. It's really hard to point to any significant weaknesses that Wild Bill has.
I think his range in a way can be a weakness, and we'll discuss that when it comes to counterplay. But yeah, I think as I've said, the thing that made us include him in the end was that his generic switch to draw a tactic. And remember what I said towards the start of the episode about just, if you need to, just shoot obstacles, because that can be a way to try and hit your switch. Very often I'll be prepared to take some damage on Bill if it means I can get a card, particularly in this new version of the AGL where cards are so difficult to come by. And related to that, I think he's got a suite of strong cards, with 2 in particular that are extremely effective. So Ace of Clubs, which is the one that just lets him have an extra attack, and Jason has already mentioned, his attack stats are good. He's a red and 2 orange with a built-in success on top, so a very reliable attack. It's not unreasonable for Bill to be able to use Ace of Clubs and shoot with his action points and take out 2 Aristos, and with a bit of support from someone like Laxmi, hitting his switch to shoot again as well can be very deadly. But in, again, this card-based meta, with them being more difficult to come across, Ace of Hearts, which allows you to draw a card back out of your discard pile to put it into your hand to use again, like Oberon's card that we just discussed, it's just very, very strong. Those are the 2 cards that I always take. The exception would be if I was playing Blitz, and then Ace of Spades can be quite useful.
Because of the amount of cards you're drawing. Interesting.
Yeah, if no one's played Blitz, I'd recommend it. It's such a fun scenario. It's really good if you're playing. Well, you can do it, Jason, but not over here in the UK. Those real life events where you meet up in person.
Blitz. Hallelujah for good leadership.
Yeah, but Blitz is a fantastic pre or post lunch scenario because it's over so quickly and it's lots of fun. And Ace of Spades is good in that. But anything else we want to say on why we think Bill's good before we talk about counterplay?
No, I mean, as one of the core 8 Aristos, I think he's so well known generally out there in the community. Bill's a strong Aristo, and he always has been a strong Aristo. He has been from the very beginning of the game. And unlike some others who have certainly fallen out of the top 5, he maintains his place thanks to that ability to keep tactics in your hand in a season where that's hard to come by.
Yeah. Excuse me.
Now, counterplays.
Yeah, fragging him, always a counterplay, but not actually that reliable. Green, blue, and 4 wounds. It is a few exceptions aside, it's more or less the best defense in the game. I mean,
Yeah,
the
he's
tankiest tank
solid.
of Max is obviously higher, but he's not easy to put down, albeit you'll find your opponent is sometimes willing to give up some of those shields and take wounds to draw extra cards. But then you're sort of putting yourself in a difficult situation. You might be trying to get rid of Bill, but then you might be giving up cards. I think Dazzled, a bit like Lei Gong, is the best counter for Wild Bill. Just run.
And you've got more ways to get it out.
Yes. Gata and Oberon, who we already discussed previously. Bill has a minimum range of 2, so if he's dazzled, he's very sad about life.
Exactly. And because he's not going to be hiding in smoke, it adds the likes of Eclipse as additional Aristos who can get dazzled out on him. And obviously, she's another one that can do it at range. And so it makes Bill more vulnerable to that particular kind of counterplay.
Yeah, stuns can be quite good on him. He's got a built-in success, so at its worst, stun just gets rid of that and brings him to a red and 2 orange. In the new AGL, the stunned rules are particularly effective at stopping him drawing tactics or getting his switch to shoot again. His switch to shoot again is 3 exclamation marks, and on a red and 2 orange, that's actually pretty hard to do. And he has to shoot a different opponent as well. It can't be you can't double tap into the same person. So he doesn't like stunned. Immobilize can work in the right situation if you can immobilize him and then run away so that you're out of his range of 6.
Absolutely. But I think on top of everything else, and the single best answer to Bill, as well as all of the ranged Aristos, other than Lei Gong, is simply to play smoke.
Yeah.
If your opponent is running Cosmo, then Wild Bill is a very, very sad boy.
Yeah, absolutely. Do we think he needs changing then? I'm going to say no. I think he's fine.
Yeah, I think that there's probably some space to tweak around with him. I wonder whether his range might be slightly longer than it should be in terms of his overall killing ability. That's probably the thing that I would consider playing with, maybe pulling that down to 5.
Okay.
But
it'd be weird that Dart's arrows could go longer, but it would make Luna a bit more distinct, and I think that's something you mentioned last week.
To be fair, it's weird that Dart's arrows go further now.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah.
I just shrug and accept that it's the Hexadome. Nothing makes sense here.
Yeah, I think Bill is strong. He remains strong. I think AGL for the card draw is what's kept him in the top 5. I think this was our most debated position.
Yeah.
So should we have a very brief discussion? Because I think we've covered our top 5 now, but a very brief overview of the 4 I've got who just missed out. So they were Cosmo, Musashi, Moonchild, and Valkyrie.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've mentioned Cosmo several times in this conversation. And Cosmo remains a very strong Aristo, but just generally speaking is strong, especially because of the way that she either enhances other Aristos or counterplays other Aristos. And so if none of those are present, she's not that great.
I mean, Cosmo is my most taken Aristo in the game on my AGL stats. I absolutely love Cosmo. I think you've already mentioned Smoke as a good counter to ranged people apart from Lei Gong. I think she's got possibly the best set of cards in the game. I think they're all really good.
Yeah, certainly it's hard to choose between them, which is good, and I'd like there to be more Aristos where you had to make a hard choice.
Yes, which I think, I spoke about TCOM already. She loves TCOM because getting one of her cards into the game so you can play with 3 of them is really important. I think all of the ones that we've covered as our top 5 are generally quite specialist. And I think Cosmo is a bit of a generalist in a game that tends to favour specialists.
Yes.
But I still think she's great. She probably would have been in my top 5 prior to AGL4. But let's not dwell too much. Musashi, I think, is possibly the one. Well, Musashi and Moonchild, I think people will be surprised about. Yeah. Just to say, if you think we're wrong, and if you think these other ones that we're talking about now, or even some that we haven't discussed, should be in the top 5, then that's absolutely valid. These are just our opinions. They could be wrong, and you may be excelling with different aristos, and we'd love to hear about it.
Absolutely, and every meta is different. Obviously, in my meta at the moment, we have the privilege of being able to play face to face. But to be blunt, Tabletop Simulator for Aristeia is so good that if you're not playing on it right now, you should be. Everybody should get Tabletop Simulator. The opportunity to play against people around the world is well worthwhile, and you should do it. This is a great opportunity to keep playing this game that we all love, and I've certainly been loving it throughout this year. It's been one of the real bright spots of 2020. But both Moonchild and Musashi, for me, suffer because they are so frag focused in a season which no longer rewards a frag focused play the way it used to be.
Yeah, I made the point last week about the way Musashi used to kind of get on a roll and snowball, and he can't do that anymore. He is still fantastic. His raw stats still make him very good, and his attack is still good. But
and it's a perfect combination of great mobility along with close combat lethality. That he remains overall a well-designed Aristo who's always going to be very competitive, but when he can't snowball the attacks, but when he can't snowball tactics to string off attacks and multi-fire his switch the way he used to, he can't shine the way he used to.
Yeah, and I still think if we move on to Moonchild very quickly, she has some issues I think that need addressing. We won't get into them here for the sake of time, but she is predominantly focused on killing. So, like you say, same as Musashi, the meta has shifted a bit. Frags can still be important, but I made the point last week that I saw a lot more games in the tournament that I ran where people were winning without having the highest number of frags, and that was generally quite unusual. And I played my league game yesterday, and I won, and for the first time, I caused 0 frags in a game.
Oh, nice. I love that. That sounds like the best kind of win to me.
Yeah, and I realised afterwards I would have been able to win without even making a single attack. I did at one point just make some attacks because I didn't have anything else to do. I ended up getting Max killed with his last wound because I made an attack and I didn't roll any shields and he died. But he was on fire anyway, and it didn't matter to the game. But I did think, I could have possibly won that game without making a single attack. So it's definitely shifted, and Valk, we've made mention of her as being good for smacking Lei Gong in the face. Not being able to be displaced is still extremely good, particularly, we've discussed Hexa. And again, another Aristo with really great cards. So my second most taken Aristo. So don't think we forgot about these. We just think that AGL Season 4 has shifted the meta a bit in a good way, as we discussed last week, and has perhaps jiggled around that top 5. And it would have been very easy for us, I think, to probably have done a top 10 and have spent 3 hours on the podcast. But we'll leave it there, I think.
Yeah, no, well said. There are solid arguments for all of those. And if you wanted to call that our top 9, that's definitely not a false reflection of the way we both feel about it. And I think it's quite nice that we're leaving it at 9 and let everyone else project their own favorite Aristo into that top 10 themselves. You're all right, everybody, every single one of you.
Well, once the podcast is out, we're recording this a couple of days before Christmas, and the previous episode hasn't quite gone out yet. So I suspect it'll be some point in the new year that this episode goes out, but we'd love to hear your thoughts. Tell us where we're wrong, where you agree, where you disagree, maybe something we've overlooked that we should have included. And we will hopefully be back at some point in the new year with another episode as well, perhaps on Brighton, perhaps on something else.
Yep. Come and have a chat with us. There's the WGC Aristeia group. There, I'm also active in the Aristeia Australia and New Zealand Aristeia groups. If you are on Facebook, if you have not yet joined the Aristeia the Game Discord, you should. It's excellent. The discussion is fantastic. The developers join us regularly there in the conversations, and it's wonderful to have that kind of access to us. And I'm also active on the Infinity forums. So if you want to kick off a conversation there, throw abuse at me. I'm Admiral JCJF, and I'll respond to that no matter what format we are chatting in.
Yeah, I'm on the same Facebook group. So not the Aristeia Australia New Zealand group, but I'm on the WGC Aristeia the Game, and also the Aristeia UK group. I'm also on the Discord. So I'm just Jonah or Michael Jonah Rees on the Facebook groups. I'm less active on the forums. But certainly, drop in, get playing. There's always some sort of event going on the Discord through Tabletop Simulator that Jason already mentioned. So we'd love to play some games against you guys and chat to you.
Yeah, come hit us up, and I'd love to play you, no matter where you are in the world.
Yes, one of the great things about TTS. I think I'm up to about 15 different countries now I've played opponents in. So
I should be keeping track of that.
Yeah, that is one of the great joys of TTS. But bye for now, folks, and thank you again for listening.